Welcome to the Inferno Cast. Today we have Mr. Roy Dean, who is a multiple martial arts expert and one of my personal heroes because we go way back to seeing his videos on the internet like before it was a thing. How's everything going today, Roy?
Things are going great. I appreciate the opportunity, Caleb.
Hey, no problem. I'm excited to have you here. A lot of people have followed you for a lot of years, and you have a major online platform for educating people in martial arts, which I think is extremely relevant right now with what's going on. But I really wanted to kind of go back to the beginning of your martial arts career as far as when you discovered martial arts as a kid and kind of what that looked like.
That is a great place to start. I think the original fascination with martial arts started watching Kung Fu movies. I remember we didn't have cable, but I took a trip to California, and on my cousin's TV, they had like Kung Fu theater, and I didn't want to leave the house. I was like, I just want to watch this. I thought it was just so captivating. And then, of course, I always enjoyed various martial arts media, like The Karate Kid was a big influence, Best of the Best. Bloodsport. I mean, my God, Bloodsport. Come on. That was like a route for all of us.
Yeah. If there was going to be like the inspiration of the MMA fighter, I feel like the Bloodsport like kicked it off, where it was like the Kumite, and just being the ultimate fighter left. And those old movies and films, it really just it's an indicator to how influential the media is on us as far as, like when you're a kid and just those word pictures with movies and films and how they can inspire us to do things in directions we go in our life. How old were you whenever you were watching these movies and seeing them?
Oh, I would say I was probably between, 7 and 12 years old. It was definitely influential, but I did a little karate when I was, difficult to say. Maybe I was 8 to maybe 10. Interesting, but honestly, I did not really understand what was going on in the class. I remember going to a tournament and just like, I guess I'm just going to follow this person and just do whatever they're doing. Okay. It was just like that cognition had not fully clicked.
Oh man, that same thing happened to me. Like my dad put me in karate classes when I was really young because he was a karate and Judo Black Belt. And he learned and he knew, he's like, you need somebody else to train your kid.
Yeah.
And he took me, and man, I was so lost. Like I tried to do class, but I just didn't understand like the rules and the structure and what was okay. And I got in big trouble for punching this kid in the stomach because I was like, it's karate. I thought that's what we're supposed to do. I was a terrible, terrible student, man. It was, yeah. So I can empathize with you.
Yeah, and that was good. It kind of launched a fascination with martial arts. And then when I was 16, I got sent to Japan as an exchange student. So I went through a Rotary Club over to Japan, and they said, well, you have to do a Japanese art after school. And that I could do a couple different things. I could do Kendo was an option. Kyudo, Japanese archery. I had some other options, but I chose Judo, and they warned me that Judo training is very tough.
Yeah.
But I was ready for it.
Were you an athlete before then? Like, were you like playing sports, pretty athletic, strong kid?
I think I was well coordinated. I kind of had an aptitude for athletics as a youngster, but I didn't really connect with, because my parents didn't push me to do organized team sports. And like, in many parts of the country, I guess football is the big thing, or maybe, basketball, but in Alaska, it's hockey. And my parents weren't connected to that set at all. So, ultimately I did like some cross country running and some things like that, but I never really hooked into the organized sports thing. So martial arts was a great way for me to kind of realize my athletic potential, but then also establish an identity through martial arts.
That's a big thing. Like you hear that so often with, especially kids coming into schools and people that get into martial arts, is they struggled with the group dynamic of like normal team sports, but then yet the group support but individual performance of martial arts seem to cater to them so much better. And why do you think that is for some people?
Mm, I think some people are maybe painfully self-aware when they're younger and they realize that, oh, this other person is so much more advanced than I am in this sport because they've been doing it for 3 years and your parents just plopped you in. And so you're behind, you're not really hip, those social cohesive connections are not there. So that can make it, you're an outsider, plus you're uncoordinated and unfamiliar with the rules. I mean, sports is generally unspoken rules. And if you don't know the unspoken rules, then the rules are shouted at you, pass the ball.
Yeah,
And then
no,
you're
that
just,
makes sense.
you know, so
Yeah.
I think there's something for people that, and my gym teachers recommended early on, they said, they thought I would be good in a couple different things, gymnastics, but more individualized sports. They could see that. So,
And that's interesting that they had that intuition to where like even they as a coach could identify that you're not going to enjoy team sports. It almost makes you wonder, like, do you think that maybe team sports is polarized of like you have the performance stars and then you have the follow along, I just want to be part of the group without really a need for self-actualization. And it's almost like maybe that in-between section of I want to be self-actualized and I want to really put in the work and I want recognition, but I'm not that superstar. I'm not going to be the lead horse of the team. I almost wonder if it's that middle segment that gets discouraged from team sports versus it being like the lower segment. What do you think?
That's an interesting assessment. I think that for a lot of people, the people that turn out to be the leaders, is usually some degree of kind of parental pushing or guiding. For them to be the leaders, they have to be really, I think, molded from an early age in order to kind of get that, to get the skill set so they can succeed. And then I think that is often part of it. And then there's this kind of like background of family support and expectation, dad reviewing the game afterwards, like, oh, you did good there, son, but I want you to we'll work on that when we get home.
It's almost like the coach's kid syndrome. Like the coach's kid is usually the better performer a lot of times because it's a lifestyle. And just like you already indicated, like martial arts becomes an identity. It helps define who you are and what you're a part of and your self-worth and your value. And some kids find that in team sports, and it works very well with the family dynamic and makes them successful.
Oh, yeah. I think that's good. Another sport that I did growing up was skiing, downhill skiing. And again, I wasn't racing or anything. I just did it because I enjoyed it. And that was a really, I haven't been skiing in like 20 years. Once I became like professional jiu-jitsu guy, I was like, that is way too dangerous.
Yeah.
I can't.
I'm the same way. My sister.
Things got to be curtailed. Yeah. So, but that was a really great way to kind of bond with nature, the silence on the ski lift, be able to kind of go out there in all kinds of days and conditions and see how you do. And there was also something about just kind of being in a flow state. I think at an early age, you could drop into a flow state because it's just you and silence and kind of the wind and that weight shift. There's this total biorhythm that ends up happening on a good run.
You hear surfers talk about the same exact thing. And, and so many people correlate surfing with jiu-jitsu, because it's that flow and it's like the vibe of just, and it's the same thing like with skiing, because I'm from the Pacific Northwest and in the mountains, and there's just something about the mountain lifestyle of the skiing and nature. It's just different. And when you're not from there and you don't connect with that, a lot of times you're kind of the strange person that people are like, okay, but I love the beaches just the same. But I know what you mean. And I feel like a lot of people parallel those examples to where, surfing or skiing or just, these moments of connection where it's just in that moment, nothing else exists. And
absolutely.
And I feel like that's those are moments that are harder to come by nowadays, with just the way our society is changing and evolving, where there's a lot less quiet time, for people, especially kids.
Yeah. Yeah, and in order to make that happen in nature, you have to be able to know the spot, make the time, go out there, fulfill it, and then generally do some kind of, you have to walk from the car to your favorite spot or whatever it is. And that all takes quite a bit of, honestly, discipline or desire.
Intentionality.
Yeah, intentionality. Yeah, perfect word. So when it comes to jiu-jitsu, I think that's why it can be kind of like it's your urban oasis if you need it to be. You go there, you have the intention, but then it's kind of foisted upon you. The demands of it force you to drop into that flow state and that one pointed concentration. A little more externally, but still it's kind of the same result.
Absolutely. It's that mind-body connection, I think, that really, because the taxing of the physical part of it, like you're being forced to learn, forced in certain circumstances. And, the body has physiological responses to mental strain. The vision goes down, the focus increases, you stop hearing all the excess, like you don't pay attention to people around you. Like, we have these physiological answers that pop up when we have to focus extremely. And the byproduct of those is this flow state, like you said. I mean, I think it's a really good observation, because you hear a lot of guys talk about it. Jiu-jitsu's my escape. It's when nothing else matters. When I'm on the mats, I'm free. I mean, you hear people talk about it just in different terms, and maybe their cognition of what's exactly happening is their awareness isn't there. Like they don't realize exactly what's happening, but they're getting the benefits of it.
100%.
Yeah. So you're in Japan, you're 16. What was the transition like? You go to judo class. Was it the typical, hey, the American showed up, let's throw him on his head? Was it, the warm welcome, like, hey, we're going to show you all the ways? I mean, were you adopted by the Japanese family and now you carry the family crest? Like, I mean, there's some 80s movies that are happening right now. So tell us which one it was.
So going there, everybody was very nice to me on the team. They didn't allow me to start training, physically interacting with the team for 6 weeks. I think they had my uniform on order because I was taller and larger, so they didn't have it available. So they ordered it, and they had me do ukemi for 6 weeks.
Wow.
Right. And I did thousands of rolls, and I had to do a test at the end, and then finally, and I had bruises like that on my shoulders. Yeah. But over the years, I've really been thankful to them because I know how to fall, and it saved me so many times.
Oh man, even outside of martial arts. I mean, I fell off of a roof one time. Man, I'm telling you, break fall saved my life.
No doubt.
At least saved my injury. I mean, let's not get too exaggerated. I mean, it's like 9 feet off of a thing onto grass, but still.
No,
and that brings up that old style training. Because we both have a very diverse background in different martial arts styles. And that's what I love is like when you connect that old school theory with like the modern application is, do you think that you could run a program like that now where you're going to do ukemi for 6 weeks and that's it?
That no. That is not appealing to consumers in the least.
Exactly. People, I think, have lost the appreciation of that learning style of stop measuring day by day, week by week. You need to be measuring like, here's my 10-year plan, my 5-year plan. And I feel like that is just slipping away from us in all facets. I mean, even look at education systems. Kids are starting college earlier in high school. Just hurry up and get the degree. The class congruency of our education system, I feel that just things are changing where it's more just now.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you feel like that's affecting our industry specifically?
Well, as these cycles increase in tempo, whether it's a news cycle or educational cycle or whatever it is, people want different. They want new. And, they're looking for, I made it this far in this amount of time. that kind of measurement is, it's okay if you're highly motivated, but I mean, you're a black belt, I'm a black belt. We're going to spend the most of our lives at black belt.
Yeah.
Most people don't see that far ahead. So there's no use in rushing those initial 5 steps, you know?
No, I can see that. That's a good point. It's like they focus on one half of the journey. It's like a number line, you know, like black belt is 0, and they feel like they're in the negative and they got to get to 0, but they're not focused about 0 and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And 0 being that's good, because, you know, it's kind of like that with the traditional, like, whatever, like Gokyu, Rokyu, you know, whatever, the Q ranks heading up towards Shodan. I think it's good to be able to learn movement patterns, even sophisticated movement patterns, and be able to apply them with like full force and vigor. And I think that's cool. However, underlying that movement pattern are, you know, conceptual lessons and principles that it just takes time. You know, some things take more time if you want them to be really good. So, you know, getting the accelerated course to jumpstart your training, I think there's nothing wrong with that, but I just don't want people to, like, people flame out, they burn out, and if you got to get lost in the journey. If you really want this to be a lifestyle and really enjoy every level, I mean, you're going to enjoy every level more if you just focus, instead of trying to be a blue belt, try to be a competent white belt and the best white belt you can be. And then you are naturally moved up into being a blue belt, instead of yearning for it and then getting disappointed when your instructor doesn't promote you at the rate that you expect to be, you know, promoted.
It's almost like there's multiple metrics, which, you know, everybody knows there's multiple metrics in measuring rank and all that. But when I look at the martial arts journey, when you think about it like a car has to have oil, and it has to have pressure, and a car has to have water at a certain temperature, you know, plus you have to have fuel in the tank. Like, there's these multiple pieces that have to happen. And I feel like in the martial arts world, people don't look at the overall car of like, man, oil pressure and temperature need to be correlated like this. We need to have gas tanks so the whole car moves. They get hyper focused on like one measurement tool, where it's like, I just need the oil pressure to be 40. You know, like I just need it to be there. And then they bypass these other metrics that really is, I mean, they're really missing out on a lot of the best parts of the journey, because their focal point is looking at the wrong things. You know?
That is interesting that you bring up the car analogy. I have a very kind of different car analogy that I apply to jiu-jitsu. Mm-hmm. Like, when you start out in jiu-jitsu, you have just some kind of a beater car. You know, you have a beater car, and, you know, it's just kind of standard. And then over time, you trade out the parts and you soup it up. You get a slightly bigger engine, you get a different exterior, you start swapping out all that stuff. And by the time you're a black belt, you basically have a Ferrari, you know, and then you start getting much more protective about the car you've built. And people, they come in and they want to race the Ferrari. And a lot of beginners are willing to, they're like, oh, my car isn't worth that much, so I'll just crash. Rather than racing you, they're willing to crash you into the side of the track in order to get an advantage. And you're like, dude, that's why we don't roll. That's why we don't roll. That appreciation of, they don't really understand. Or even worse is, people will just like, they'll buy a kit car, they'll just replace same inside Ferrari exterior.
Yep.
You know, and neither of those. Actually have the real machine. Create the real machine.
It lacks authenticity.
Yeah.
And the authenticity, I think a lot of times people get misconstrued. Like, the authenticity value is not the external in which I propagate to the world of like, look how long it took me to get my black belt. Look how many schools I own. Look how many tournaments I won. Like, the authenticity is really like the internal development that comes from that journey. Just like when you see people go through trauma, you know, everybody has a lot of sympathy for them, but usually later in life, that person values that trauma more than anything in their life because it taught them the most important lessons that they carry with them, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It takes courage to kind of go into the vulnerability, like what hurts you, to allow that. But those are those holes are what lets the light come through. And you know, it's a whole process, just like your tournament losses, you remember them.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I lost my first Muay Thai fight, and they actually gave me a second place medal. And I wrote the date and time and what happened on it. And to this day, it hangs on my mirror. And that was like 20 years ago. Because it reminds me what I'm not going to do. You know, it was just, it just ironically worked out, you know, to where I was like, okay, never again. We're not, you know. So yeah, I definitely agree that the losses really define your success. Because, you know, being successful all the time, that's a slippery slope, because a lot of times your values get contorted where what you perceive to be reality is really not reality, you know, especially how you fulfill yourself, you know. You fall in love with the measurement. I was talking to Travis Stevens, and he talked about it with the Olympic gold, to where, you know, he was a little bit too focused on the goal in 2012 and just kind of had basically lied to himself that, you know, I'm the best I could ever be. I could never be any better than I am now, because he was following an old platform of like, this is what it takes to be the best. And he said after 2012, you know, he really hit rock bottom, but it taught him so much about what really matters, you know, what the journey's really about. And that's why, like, in 16, he was able just to go through, because he had really found his true self. You know, I think that's very in line with what you're saying, you know, about that journey. So how long were you in Japan?
So I was in Japan for a year, and I did their tournament system. So I had enough wins to get my Shodan by the end of the year. I came back to the US, and I did do judo for a year or two in, I continued in high school to do it, but the judo community is very small in Alaska. And it's such a cultural institution in Japan, more like wrestling in the US, like everyone's doing it. And so it wasn't the same. And I wanted other things. I actually wanted to train in Aikido and learn what Steven Seagal was doing.
Absolutely. He's on TV. Now, we're above the law, not fire down below Steven Seagal.
Yes, we're above the law, maybe out for justice by that point.
Yeah. Like, we got to clarify where it's like, I mean, there's some generations there of like, yeah, that's what we were all thinking. So now in Judo and Aikido, complements usually are a lot of times taught together, you know, because the circle theory of just different sizes and applications. Did you have some major Aikido influences when you're in Japan? Like, was that a conversation? Was that relevant or around?
No. I would have liked to have studied Aikido, but it just wasn't available in my area.
Right.
And sometimes it's better to not get what you want. I'm really glad that I trained in judo. It was very formative. I mean, physically formative. And it taught me a lot about repetition and how many repetitions it actually takes to be able to execute a technique. And so that was good. Then when I went to, when I finally started training Aikido when I think I was 19, and it was good. It was under a man named Calvin Koshiyama, who's under Frank Duran in the Northern California Aikido Association, Aikikai style. So very kind of middle of the road, not too mystical. Yeah. It's a good style. It's a good middle of the road Aikido style.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed it, and I decided that I wanted to get more serious and become a live-in student. And then I thought about moving. Maybe I go back to Japan to do that, because a lot of people go to Iwama, or they go to the Aikikai headquarters in Tokyo or something. But I just knew Japan has a whole bunch of, there's just so many hoops you got to jump through as a foreigner, and it's expensive, and it's just, it's such a pain.
Yeah. The economic and paperwork structure, you know, because it's kind of ironic, is I started studying Aikido about the same age, and I did it for rehab because I had a chest
Hmm.
surgery. So I was doing a lot of hard
Oh,
styles coming up. So I had this massive chest surgery as a teenager, and they're like, "You'll never do anything again." So I went and found an Aikido instructor and did that for rehab. And during that time was the discussion of going to Japan for, like a year sabbatical, live-in student, etc.
mhm.
And the paperwork and the economics, like it was just so much hassle, which Dad was willing. He was like, "Hey, I'm
Yeah.
willing," because he knew that cultural influence was going to be important. But for me, I was just like, man, I'm a teenager. It's like, this is a lot of work. I don't want to do this. So, um, so whenever you decided to stay local with Aikido, what was your interpretation? Like, how did you perceive it coming from that harder judo style?
Yeah. Uh, in judo, I had felt the magic a couple of times. Most of the time it was hard. Like it was difficult to throw someone. I had to actually fight hard to get that opportunity. But a couple of times, just everything aligns and it's just perfectly executed and in a fight. And you're like, whoa, so that's what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And in Aikido, you get an opportunity to feel that perfect blend all the time. Now, the situations aren't realistic, but the leverage is realistic.
Yeah. I
And
always chalk it up to attribute development. I'm
yeah,
like, look, you take the best fighter in the world and they jump rope, they don't take a rope in the ring or the cage with them. It's attribute development. And a lot of times Aikido gets a lot of, criticism and flack, and a lot of
hmm,
styles do. And my thing is like, well, I understand their perspective of that, but also I look at a lot of it as attribute development so that you're basically trying to study the moments between moments and
oh my
try to
God,
get sensitive to that.
so well said. So few people have that perspective of like, it can be. I look at it as like high level sensitivity training.
Yeah.
And looking at those moments, because when you do a combat sport, you usually don't put a lot of emphasis with the blending moments. It's more about kind of like, no, I'm going to enforce my will.
Yeah, and it goes back to time distance equations as well. It's like, well, if you only have so many hours a day and you're trying to be a good physical MMA fighter, well, then obviously I'm not going to spend all those hours working on that, the Aikido work and the softness or Kata work. But as your goals change and evolve, because when I look at it as a lifetime, that's why I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I've got basically 60 years to train martial arts. So the first portion, as soon as I discovered MMA and things of that nature, like I dove in, just
Yeah.
like punch, kick in the elbow. And then as I get older, like now I'm spending much more time back on some of those old traditionals because I have a lot of hours in the day and the body can only push the physical limits so much before it's just like, that's it, you're done. So,
So true. So true. Yeah, there is a timing, and I consider judo a young man's art.
mhm.
You can do it for a while longer, but BJJ. I mean, the old judo masters would bring their game down to newaza over
Yeah,
time, and
yeah,
so that's I just I basically just stick with BJJ these days. BJJ and yoga, and little.
yeah. So how'd you make the transition from Aikido into BJJ? Like, how did you get in? How did you see it? Where did it come from? Was it, on the VHS tape? A friend was training. Like, so where did you find it? Because I know it looked familiar from Nawaza, but there had to have been a transition part where it's like, man, this is different.
Yeah, when I saw Hoist in UFC 2, it was like I kind of knew what he was doing because of the judo training, but he was
Yeah,
doing it in a different way,
yeah,
in a very smooth and sophisticated way. And their strategy, yeah, you can have the techniques, but their strategy and it was just so smart. And I thought, I kind of know what he's doing, but I want, and just like everyone, when my judo captain threw me for the first time in Japan, like was multiple times, 20 times, and I couldn't do anything against it. I thought, oh, I want that.
yeah,
And so similarly watching the UFC, I was like, oh, I want that. I want to do what he's able to do.
yeah.
And so, you get that desire, you get that hunger in you, and you're willing to do what it takes. So I started exploring, dabbling in it up in Alaska. But people they weren't that skilled. They just, it wasn't like really authentic technique. It was more of guys that kind of like saw some stuff.
Yeah, it was probably that era of like that hybrid, shoot fighting, catch wrestling, jiu-jitsu, like because that was
Oh
kind
yeah.
of my first influence as well. It was kind of like this hybrid. If you're on the ground, like this hurts, this makes them tap, but I feel like it wasn't as strategized. It was like moment. It was almost just like almost like being a sniper. Is like if you end up here, jerk this off or squeeze this, or if you end up over
Right.
there, do that. But the connection between was kind of definitely lost in translation at that time, just because people just didn't have enough experience. Like we weren't connected to the source.
Absolutely.
It's just lack of education. Just lack of education. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Then I moved down. So I dabbled a little in Alaska, and then I moved down into into the dojo of a Japanese and Aikido, Japanese Jiu Jitsu and Aikido master. And so I did that. And while I was living in that dojo, I met a woman who had done some real Brazilian Jiu Jitsu training in Santa Cruz, California. I was living in Monterey, California. And so Santa Cruz was about 45 minutes away. It was 45 minutes north. So I was introduced to her jiu-jitsu instructor, a man named Klaudia.
mm-hmm.
And eventually I started training under him, simultaneously doing the Japanese jiu-jitsu. And it was great. I mean, it was rough in those days. It was rough. But Klaudia was a gentleman. He had a firm grasp on a school. It was never, it was a clean, great training facility. But it was just the guys in those days in that kind of hybrid MMA, NHB. It was
like
the guys.
Yeah,
dude, the guys that wanted to do Vale Tudo were doing BJJ.
Yeah,
and they treated the training sessions like that. It was it was just tough, and I knew I was with the toughest guys. I knew that the way that we were training was not optimal. But I couldn't really voice any concern on that.
Yeah, it's like, who am I to say anything? It's like, I'm a low guy on totem pole. I just have a little bit of logic. It's almost like the progression of sports in general. You look at football, how it started, what the practices look like, the attributes they valued, the career length. And then you just look at the evolutions over time where they started training smarter, and more resources and supplementation of like, yeah, we don't need heavyweights on the front line, hitting each other with the quarterback all the time. Like that's not smart for the team. So then they changed it, like we'll bring in people from the outside to hit, or we'll hit dummies. And I feel like MMA is within our generation that we got to observe the maturity of the sport to where, it's like, look at boxing. Boxers, Floyd Mayweather doesn't call Manny Pacquiao for a sparring session to get better. Like that doesn't happen. They hire sparring partners. Like, I need you to come in. This is your specific job. Number one is don't hurt me. Number two is let me work on this attribute, etc. And you hear about Rickson doing that back in Brazil, where he would go find the guys like who had the best triangle, and he would go do like a closed door session and just do nothing but triangle escapes. And then you go find like the armbar guy and then do nothing but armbar escapes. So like you see the evolution, and MMA was real late to the party where, I can remember seeing 8 or 9 UFC champions in the same room beating each other up, and everybody was different weights, but it was just like, this is what you do. We beat each other up to get better instead of it being like strategic and being programmed, which is basically what you were seeing in the early days of that jiu-jitsu club, is like the programming just wasn't quite there yet.
Mm-hmm. It was, and aren't we lucky to have been able to observe? That was one of the most exciting things in my life, was watching the evolution from martial arts mysticism and movie magic to observing UFC 2, like those first 20 UFCs.
Yeah.
Were just incredible. And then you had Pride. I miss Pride.
I do too. Man, that was my favorite.
It was so good, so respectful. We don't get the freak show MMA fight anymore. That was like the land of those. Oh my gosh, they were so entertaining. I just watched yesterday. I watched a fight between Alexander Emelianenko and Krokop. They had it from the ref cam. Yeah. And dude, seeing a young Krokop and his movement, and just, it was so beautiful and exciting. And I miss those days. I mean, I kind of feel like MMA is a child. I watched it birth. I watched it grow up. And now I call it maybe once a month.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
And sometimes we don't even check in.
Yeah,
You know?
and it'll never be what it was, which isn't bad. It's just different. I really have a lot of value for the snapshot that we got to take of its evolution, because it was martial arts versus other martial arts that turned into this amalgam of like techniques and movements that is now evolved into the genetic athleticism to where it'll never be guys like me and you doing it again. It's going to be what's your 40 time, what's your Columbine look like to see if you're able to go be a professional MMA fighter. And people's, I think that they're going to lose the like history of a fighter. Like no fighter is going to be bringing their style to the game anymore. It's going to be you go in and you run these plays so that you can be successful. It's not going to be, oh man, this guy's been a boxer his whole life. Look how he puts in that piece. It's just going to be here's the strategy that wins, within MMA.
For you, using the rules as much as possible. Okay, you're a super athlete, and we're going to equip you with this skill set, which is the easiest to learn. We'll give you just enough to be able to escape tricky positions.
Yeah.
Go. And
there's credibility to that. I mean, because it's like, those are the best fighters in the world. If I crawled in that cage with all the diversity of my martial arts and everything, at 40 years old, like, man, there's no secret moves that are going to stop that blast double from a 22-year-old animal.
Oh my God.
It's like,
Tell me about it. And look, and we realize you say you're 40.
Almost.
Almost. And I'm 45. I feel it. I feel like
I'm in denial. I don't feel anything. I feel good.
I feel pretty good. But I feel the pace of like a really skilled, like 25-year-old black belt.
Oh.
And I'm just like, okay, I might know a few more tricks, but it's still, I can't keep up that pace. And you just kind of accept it. Or I have been against Division I wrestlers, and I understand that. And there's no, you understand their skill set is really, you're not going to win in that arena.
You're not
going to win in that arena.
Stop it. Yeah.
But just, that kind of acceptance, I think that's one of the most beautiful things that comes with age and experience. Like, I don't need to go out there and long for some moment where I can prove what I know or how good I am. It's like, I've had plenty of those, and I'm just okay using jiu-jitsu as a mood regulator and using it to empower people. It's a marvelous technology. And for most people, it's more than enough for self-defense, confidence. It's more than enough for most people, but that's kind of the middle path. And I try to promote the middle path with jiu-jitsu, with martial arts, with everything. Let's get away from those extremes. This is enough, and it's more sustainable.
Yeah, no, and that's a good perspective too. And I think a lot of martial arts athletes and practitioners, that seems to be a very general trend. It's like, even look what like Pat Miletich is doing now. He's not out there trying to train the next world champions for the UFC fighters and all that. It's like you pass through it, you evolve, things change, and your skill sets change, and some of your desires. Because like when I was younger, it was all about MMA and competition and fighting, and just ran that as hard as I could. And then now it's transitioning more into like leadership and inspiring others and seeing these people come up. Some come up as fighters, but a lot of them just coming up as individuals to grow. And like you said, the skill set's going to serve them, because you take the best guys on the planet, and if they fight 3 times a day, every day for years, it's going to be a hodgepodge. Especially if you take everybody on the planet, because like Travis Stevens, to reference that once again, he was saying, he's like, man, a lot of times he said he believes the best people on the planet aren't the world champions at that moment, because there's these circumstances, because he talked about, like, he knows Russian judo guys that didn't even make the team that probably could go win, the medal today. Because it's a moment in time,
Totally.
that circumstance and that rule set. And it's where, I celebrate competition. I've always loved it, but it also goes back to that analogy of, we can't get focused on just one gauge. We got to be looking at multiple gauges, so that way you can be a well-rounded martial artist, because that's what really fulfills people is, the full plethora that comes with the martial arts lifestyle. So when you found the BJJ and trained with Klaudia, how long was it before you were just like, man, I'm in, I do this all the time. This is my new reality for the next 20 years.
I could only train with Klaudia one time a week for the first year.
It's painful. It's probably healthy for you, though. It's probably healthy for you.
I took the beating on Fridays, and then I recovered the rest of the week.
Yeah.
And then the next year I could go twice a week, which after I left the Uchideshi program in Monterey, I could go twice a week. And I realized that twice a week was more than twice a week, because your body didn't have a chance to forget what you had learned. So I was really happy with that, and I was into it, but I wasn't really that deeply connected with it as of yet. I was training as hard as I could, and I was like white belt, blue belt, wearing the Team Claudio Franza Jiu-Jitsu. Like, I'm a tough guy.
Yeah.
I wear that everywhere. But then when I moved to San Diego to go to school, finish up school, I wanted to get my purple belt. I talked to Mr. Harris about what that would take. I started training with Roy Harris. Mm-hmm. And then I got a training partner. He said, if you really want to get good, you have to have a training partner. So I got a training partner. His name was Brad, super smart guy. And we hit it off. And then he and I became very, very tight. We became great training partners, great friends. And then we were deep into the lifestyle. Like that, like when I went from high blue belt into purple belt, that was like heading into the sauce. Because we had, we rented a house, the backyard. It had kind of this open backyard. It was covered kind of like a lanai or something, just outdoor space. We covered it with mats. We had gis hanging up. We would train. We had he was just getting into CrossFit. That was like very new at the time. He went to the first cert, and it was just a really interesting time for emerging physical technologies, and we were just deep into it. Sometimes we'd lift weights, sometimes we'd roll. It was just like so easily accessible. And then we began teaching, and that went on for years. And eventually, when I got my black belt and then I left to start an academy, Brad kind of backed out of the jiu-jitsu. And then he would, he's a scientist. He works he's got a great job. He's got a great normal life. Right.
Yeah.
But that like extra connection is what enabled me to like really delve deeply into that lifestyle. And then I've been in it ever since. It's really one of the most satisfying paths that I can imagine.
And for being such an individualized sport, activity, hobby, lifestyle, it's very communal. And that's usually where people get fueled to perform and achieve, so well, is because of the community that comes with it. Like that relationship with Brad, he wasn't there chasing the rank, trying to be a black belt, be the best guy on the planet. He was there because that energy of that relationship and the exchange, and you guys were making each other better. On the mats and off the mats, where it's just like pushing the standard, and, you just think back to those types of influences in your life, that drive us to succeed or perform at higher levels. And it usually has a relationship correlated with it. Mm-hmm. Some people are moved by difficult times where this happened, I'm going to go be a better me. But I really hear a lot more stories of where people are moved by a relationship in their life and motivated to be better that way. So I think that was probably a very fun time that a lot of people can probably identify with, where they had a moment where they were just training all the time and their buddies were just all into it, and it was just grow, 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 and then it evolves. So when you become a BJJ Black Belt, at that moment, how much were you trying to integrate the other styles and kind of like keep those other styles polished? Or did you kind of set them to the side for a moment to focus on this?
I went all BJJ once I moved to San Diego. I just could not continue. Years later, I tried to go back and do the Japanese Jiu Jitsu again. Mm-hmm. But you need to buy into the system. There has to be a certain degree of belief that the work and the time that you're putting in, the repetitions, calories, whatever you want to call it, is going to correlate to something that, I don't know, has some real world benefit. Yeah. And it wasn't there for me. It wasn't there for me because I just needed to get better. And along the way, I was like, okay, I'm going to do kickboxing. When I'm, once I get my purple belt, I'll be in the kickboxing class and I'll be doing. Then I got my purple belt. I was like, I'm still not that good. I need to get better. I need to get better. And then and I'm still not that, and that you just ad nauseum for the rest of your life, So the jiu-jitsu just was this perpetual riddle of how do I do this? How do I keep increasing my performance, my ratio of wins, and you just keep amping that up, and then you're, by the time you're an advanced black belt, it's like 98% of the time you win, 99% of the time. And some people are still not satisfied with that.
Yeah. That's
which is a funny thing.
Those are the lifers, man. They're chasing that. And they know that it's impossible, but yet it could be probable. That's the part that's always there that's like, no. It just, when I'm 60-something years old, I'm sure I'll have it then. It's like, logic goes out the window, it becomes the emotional drive. I feel like that's where a lot of injuries come from too, is like as athletes age, is the mind stays young and sharp and the body starts to have struggles and issues, and they will react as a 20-year-old body, but then the 40-year-old body or 50-year-old body is like, oh no, that ain't happening. And then injury happens, like the overcompensation, a little too much weight shift or things of that nature. And I feel like as an aging athlete, what do you feel helps keep people focused on the right priorities? Because like you see people sometimes as they get older in life, they still value themselves by their 25-year-old identity. In the martial arts, out of the martial arts, like, they're retired, they're older. Well, I'm of no value because I can't work like I used to, and they don't change their definition of success. So how would you advise people in the martial arts realm, as they're getting to be older athletes, how do they shift their priorities and their value system to stay fulfilled?
I think competition it keeps the teeth in an art, and it allows you to really, rev your engine into the red line against people that are also doing it, and allows you to discover, it pulls different things out of you, which I think are important. But still, shifting that to competition is, at most 20% of the entire art, maybe probably 10% of the entire art. And to just step away from that, when you focus on those shiny metal objects that are offered at the competition, when you kind of drop that and then start focusing on the art, I think that's an important aspect of kind of letting go. And realizing the fullness of it, the fullness being the tribal connections that you make with other members. Everyone out there listening to this should read Tribe by Sebastian Junger. Like that is such a great, and it explains so much about our art. Bless you. No sweat. Our art, communities, veterans, just political tribalism, everything.
The human experience. It really just, how we are emotionally wired as creatures. I think that sometimes we just, we're almost a little too self-absorbed. Like, we feel so individual, unique, and special that we don't see these very generic ways that we are wired, and what inspires and moves us. And I think that book did a good job of kind of tacking down a few of those to be like, hey, look in the mirror. Yeah, not so smart after all, are you? You're pretty much a creature of habit. Yeah. But I think that's how we leverage success too, because when you understand those operating parameters, you can leverage them to get people to succeed faster, which you've seen in the athletic sport. I mean, look at BJJ now at the World Championships, man. Like,
oh my God.
It is just, I mean, you go watch film from like 1997 World Championships and now, and it's just a completely different game. And I think it's because they've figured out how to leverage different parts of those attributes, and the community and the tribe is like pushing the creativity and just really pushing the envelope. And it's really been neat to watch. Really.
It's been a fascinating evolution, and people will criticize just in general, period, blanket statement.
That's the truth.
And I think that we should appreciate all of it. The submission grappling, the fight to wins, the Kasais, the IBJJF tournaments, at least a run on time. That's nice. Yeah. I mean, every aspect of it. I love the evolution. I could have only dreamed it would be as popular, and that as it is right now. And I think that's wonderful, and it gives a lot more opportunities for people getting into the art. But ultimately, as an older athlete, you have to start using it as a method of, I think if you want to be successful in your life, you have to have kind of high-powered practices that keep you aligned and functioning properly in kind of an optimal state. And BJJ is a very powerful practice that leverages a lot of different physical attributes, and there's strategic stuff. It just is a great way to keep your machine fine-tuned. And I agree. Yeah. So and if you want to do some other stuff alongside that, in addition to help give you a little balance or whatever, then that's also good. But I think kind of dropping into that where, look at the other 50-year-olds your age, like, what are they doing? What do they look like? Hey, dude, you may not be beating the 25-year-old black belts, but you're so much more capable. Look at, when you're involved as a martial arts school owner, this, when you're involved in this physical culture, your perceptions get kind of warped on healthy. It's just like guys that do, there's a point when guys start doing steroids where they don't look normal anymore. But they don't see that because it's kind of daily for them. But I remember the one day with this guy that I knew, he just he went over the line. I mean, I patted him on the back. It was just hard as a table. And I was like, oh, dude, you don't see what's happening. But, similarly, we just kind of, we get in this immersive bubble where everyone's in shape and everyone's striving and everyone's, just get a little perspective, kind of leave this weird microcosm subculture, which is beautiful and fascinating and allows you to meet some really interesting people, but just accept it for what it is. I mean, black belts are not saints. They're not gurus. One of the best quotes I ever heard was, do you know what they say about good athletes? They're good athletes.
That's it. Yeah. And I wholeheartedly agree with that, that there is a lot of times there's a whole different plethora of expectations that fall onto people that perform extremely well at certain tasks. And a lot of people run away from that. I can remember in the NBA, I think it was Charles Barkley back in the 90s that was, and I mean, and I could be wrong on this, but I want to say that he was one of the ones voicing that, of just all like, yeah, I'm not your role model. Like, I'm here to play ball, and and that was part of his competitive advantage and things of that nature. But you see it with these professional sports all the time, where people put the burden on them, like, well, you're a role model, you should behave this way. And and you can see both, because like I very much agree, if you have the platform to influence, then you have the responsibility that comes with that influence. But I can also understand that when you have a platform to perform what you do best, and it happens to come with this influence, that was not your responsibility. You're not the one choosing to follow you. You're not the one telling everybody to listen to what you say. You're performing a task to take care of you and your family. So it's a dichotomy of, it's a very unique perspective. And just like with the black belts, that just because you're a black belt doesn't make you an ace investor.
No doubt. No doubt. Yeah, exactly. I wonder what Gordon Ryan thinks of the market right now.
Yeah. Gordon has always lots of opinions. It's always entertaining. It just definitely is. It's a unique, platform, because you think back, there was a time where playing football never meant being on television, being a millionaire or a superstar. And if you go back to these other times where I played football for the sport because it was fun, and then they ended up famous and on TV, just like with baseball, there was a time where they transitioned to that. And I feel like right now is the time of martial arts where it's the new athletic sport that is being sensationalized and magnified to a position to where people that just showed up to class for several years and went to some tournaments now have millions of followers and just a degree of influence over people that they never knew even could exist. And I think that, that's where in the next 20 years, there's going to be more PR managers and things like that within this industry that probably would have to grow, because it was an unexpected result. Because nobody, when you got into BJJ, you weren't getting into it so that you could be a world champion, be all over Instagram and television and sell DVDs.
No.
That wasn't it. You just wanted access to the information. And now, look at all the access to information people have. So it's like the goal was achieved. I mean, we did it. The industry made money. We now have access. I can remember driving 2 hours one way for a private lesson, with Mark McFan and Danny Dring, that were kind of ahead of the curve at that time. And that was the only access I had. And that was watching these copied VHS tapes that we'd made so many copies that all the white lines were there, and we're trying to make out the triangle of like, what's a Kimura? Like, just,
oh yeah.
And we didn't have access, and we started gyms and clubs because we didn't have access, but now we do. So now the measurement is shifting. And I think that goes back to what you're saying, is you have to shift your measurement by understanding your perspective on the style, and and the reach that it has in your life, and not getting caught up in that bubble like you talked about. And I think that's a very valid and discerned input to give to people, moving into this is don't get trapped too much into the bubble or into one perspective. Because look at a lot of people that struggle with fulfillment. It's usually because they're trying to measure their happiness by a metric that is not correlated. That doesn't make any logical sense. And I think that, within martial arts, people fall into that as well. So right now, when you look at yourself as a full, well-rounded martial artist, what do you feel like are like top 2 or 3 principles from the different backgrounds and styles that have basically influenced your current perspective, methodology, and view on martial arts as a whole?
I think a couple of key principles have emerged. It's not really about techniques. It's more about having reliable movement patterns that, and you chain those together and they create techniques, but it's about reliable movement patterns that you have ingrained in your body, and having those so they're extremely efficient. Number 2, alignment of your bones. It's much more about bones than muscle. Having your bones aligned, and so your joints can stack on one another, and learning how to do that and letting your skeletal structure take the weight is so important. And then, relaxation. Relaxation protects you. People would never believe that because, initially most students, to accomplish anything, they usually have to like summon everything in them to accomplish a physical task. It's like full power, right? But later, once you get the alignment and you know where they're going, so you can kind of block them early or get in that, it's, it's so much more about, timing and sensitivity are important, and they can be continually improved. But I think just relaxing, getting out of the way, instead of trying to do something, you just try to add to or prevent them or get in there early so they can't even start that. It's about seeing how the fight is just beyond their reach or getting in there so they can't even begin to reach. It's those things are much more obvious to me now, but initially it was like, no, that's the secret technique.
I have a VHS tape of my first grappling private lesson with a friend of mine, which will never, ever, never be publicized. And I can remember my mental perspective of that moment and getting to watch that film 20 years later. It is just, it helps me understand the learning curve and the process that the students are going through, because like you said, you're just so unaware. I usually use an example of it's like driving a car with the windshield covered with one little hole cut out. Mm-hmm. Your goal in life, is to expand the perspective of the windshield, because the other cars and the exits and the obstacles, they're going to exist no matter what. It's your perspective on them to navigate that really changes. It's the same road, same struggle. And I think it goes to life in general, where when you can just open up the perspective and you can navigate, things look and feel easy, whenever the reality is, you just had to grow as an individual. And those principles, I think, are so on par for the way that martial arts works, because it's physiology, it is physical movement, that two arms, two legs, if you're fortunate. And, there's only so many ways the human body can move and interact. And it's just a lot of it, that mental perspective on that, like you talked about, of just how you see it and how you program the game. I think that's really sound advice. I really appreciate you taking time today to talk to me. It's a unique time. Everybody's kind of cooped up, trying to scratch that mental itch for them. And so, man, we could just go on forever, but you've really been an influence on the industry as a whole, because what you saw, you were putting stuff out 10, 12 years ago. It was early 2000s, and just the artistic form in which you put out, the videos and the perspective, it had this traditional flair. You really brought the old school love of martial arts that I think a lot of us had as kids with the Brazilian Jiu Jitsu specifically, because you were one of the first black belts that was really embracing the multiple styles on a platform that people could see. They could hear you talking about Aikido and these other styles that were traditional, and how it paired with the Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and how everything worked in synergy, versus a lot of the original things that was like this versus this. You're very progressive with that. Was that with some intention? Did it just happen to be that way because that was your journey? How did you see it at that time?
Part of it was respect to what I had learned, and I saw the value of what I had learned, and I think it was important for me to voice that for the styles that didn't have a voice, or at least a spokesperson at that time. So I think that was part of it. Also coming into Brazilian Jiu Jitsu as another form of Jiu Jitsu and not the only form of Jiu Jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is a perennial technology that goes way beyond. Sometimes it's applied against weapons. Sometimes it's applied against hand-to-hand combat. You know, it can be distraction, angles, leverage.
Yep.
It's timeless. And the, you know, with the kind of artistic aesthetic bent that I put on the videos, that was an expression, a creative expression, but also kind of a spiritual channeling. It's like, how much of my energy can I put into this video where people will pick something up from it? And maybe they won't even know why they like that video or why they feel good afterwards, but it's about compressing and combining things so that people walk away with a positive impression of the art. And I had such love for jiu-jitsu. It's easy for me to kind of express that in the videos I'm producing. It's not just a product, it's an expression.
Well, it definitely worked. I can remember the first one because it took me back to like some of those other impacts in my life, like the Steven Seagal movies, you know, and stuff like that, that just, I was enamored because what was different is this was the same emotional impact that I had from those other influences, except this was the pinnacle of stylistic expressions because we knew BJJ was like the stronger style, you know, at the time. We're like this is what you did for realistic fighting. Like we knew this worked, and it kind of had everything in it. So I immediately was just like, oh man, I need to, you know, I'm just like, I need more of these videos because it was just such a unique approach. And now I look back, and you were just so much wiser, you know, especially than like I was, because I can remember I had a lot of resentment for my early 20s for my previous traditional training because I didn't really have anybody putting it together. But then I met an instructor, you know, like my coach Danny Dring has a wide martial arts background, and he helped me synergize to where the resentment went away and I was able to pull the good out of it. And then now I appreciate my traditionals and the old school stuff, and I value it a lot more. But I mean, I had a time there where, I mean, I was really bothered by all the time and effort I'd spent doing the wrong things. You know, I just had some skewed perspectives. And when you're 20, you know everything. So, and I mean, you really impacted me as a martial artist because you blended that. And that's when I started wondering, man, I wonder if there's residual benefits of doing these other things that could pay off. And now I wholeheartedly believe that there is. Whether I'm like stick, knife, firearms, you know, multiple assailants, MMA, kickboxing, Muay Thai, wrestling, like all of those principles, they all apply. It's just getting them to synergize through fundamental principle learning, like what you were talking about. I mean, that really encompassed it very well, of just the physiology of the body, and, you know, just having to control people and the leverage and the distraction. And it just, that was a very experienced, well-discerned explanation that really hit it on the head. So that was awesome. Sorry, man, I can just keep going on and on. I'm just, you know, such a martial arts nerd with it, but appreciate you taking time. I hope that you guys are staying busy. I know that, you know, you've got a lot of online projects and you influence people all over the world, which definitely is appreciated now. The world needs more of that, and definitely hope the family's safe and all is well.
I appreciate the opportunity, Kaleb. Thank you.